The UNS Titan's hammer drifted through the empty space between stars like a predator waiting for prey. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the endless black void through the main view screen. His ship was not like the sleek vessels that other species built for exploration. The Titan's hammer looked exactly like what it was, a warship disguised as a research vessel. The bridge hummed with quiet activity as his crew monitored deep space for any signs of life or interesting phenomena. Earth had only joined the galactic community 18 months ago when humanity finally cracked faster than light travel. Most species took centuries to develop such technology, but humans had a talent for making weapons out of anything they touched. Commander Lisa Hayes sat at her communication station running routine scans of nearby star systems. She had been monitoring radio frequencies for 3 days without finding anything more interesting than cosmic background radiation. The Kepler system was supposed to be empty according to galactic charts, but those charts were often wrong about frontier regions. At exactly 1400 hours ship time, her console lit up like a Christmas tree. Multiple signals were flooding in from the Kepler system, all broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Lisa's training kicked in as she isolated the strongest signal and began running it through the universal translator. "Captain, I'm picking up a distress call from the Kepler system," she announced, her voice cutting through the bridge chatter. "It's coming in on multiple emergency bands and it sounds desperate." Jake turned from the view screen and walked over to her station. The rest of the bridge crew stopped what they were doing to listen. Distress calls were rare in this part of space, mostly because there weren't supposed to be any inhabited worlds within 50 light-years of their current position. "Can you clean up the signal?" Jake asked, leaning over Lisa's shoulder to look at the readouts. The waveform patterns looked unlike anything in their database of known species communication methods. Lisa's fingers danced across her console as she applied various filters and enhancement algorithms. Slowly, the static cleared and a voice emerged from the speakers. It spoke in a language that sounded like insects clicking and buzzing, but the universal translator was already working to decode the meaning. "This is Diplomat Zigth of the Vexti Collective calling any vessels in range," the voice said through the translator's mechanical tones. "Our homeworld is under siege by the Korthak Empire. We have no military capabilities and our population of 12 billion civilians faces extinction. We request immediate humanitarian assistance from any civilized species within range of this transmission." The bridge fell completely silent. Jake could hear the low hum of the ship's engines and the quiet beeping of various monitoring systems. 12 billion civilians was more people than had ever lived on Earth at one time. The idea of that many lives hanging in the balance made his stomach tighten. "How far out are they?" Jake asked, already knowing the answer would determine whether they could help or would have to listen to an entire civilization die. 47 light-years. "Sir," Lisa replied after checking her navigation systems. "At maximum speed we could reach them in 36 hours. Chief Science Officer Dr. Amy Carter looked up from her station where she had been analyzing the signal data. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple other transmissions from the same system. It looks like whoever these Vexti are, they're broadcasting their distress call in every direction hoping someone will hear them." Jake walked back to his command chair and sat down heavily. 47 light-years was well outside the range of quantum communications with Earth. Even if he sent a message to Starfleet Command right now, it would take weeks to reach them, and weeks more to get a response. By then, whatever was happening in the Kepler system would be long over. "Lisa, can you establish two-way communication with this Zigth?" he asked. "Working on it now, sir," she replied, adjusting her console settings. "The signal is pretty weak, but I think I can boost our transmission power enough to reach them." While Lisa worked on communications, Jake called his senior staff to the bridge. Executive Officer Commander Pete Baker arrived first, followed by Chief Tactical Officer Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fox and Chief Engineer Commander Rick Davis, Chief. Medical Officer Dr. Helen Parker came up from sickbay where she had been reviewing the medical profiles of various alien species they might encounter. "What's the situation?" Pete asked as he took his position at Jake's right hand. "We've got a distress call from an unknown species under attack by another unknown species," Jake explained. 12 billion civilians and no military to protect them. Sandra Fox pulled up the tactical display on her console and began analyzing what little data they had about the Kepler system. "Sir, if this is a military situation, we need to know what we're flying into. The Titan's hammer is tough, but we're just one ship." Dr. Amy Carter had been quietly analyzing the linguistic patterns in the distress call. Captain, based on the grammar structure and vocal patterns, I believe the Vexti are an insectoid species. Their language suggests a highly cooperative social structure, possibly similar to Earth's social insects but with individual consciousness. Lisa's console chimed as she successfully established a connection with the alien vessel. I've got them, sir. Putting it on main speakers. The voice that came through the speaker sounded tired and desperate. Unknown vessel, this is Zikth of the Vexti Diplomatic Corps. Thank you for responding to our call. Are you able to provide assistance? Jake stood up and walked closer to the communication station. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Nations ship Titan's Hammer. We received your distress call and are currently 47 light-years from your position. Can you explain your situation? There was a long pause before Zikth responded. Captain Morrison, the Korthak Empire has surrounded our homeworld with 47 warships. They demand our complete surrender and the enslavement of our entire population. We have no military vessels and our defensive systems are purely for protection against asteroids and cosmic debris. They have given us 72 hours to surrender or they will begin orbital bombardment of our cities. The number hit Jake like a physical blow. 47 warships against one converted research vessel. The smart move would be to report the situation to Earth and let Starfleet Command decide how to respond. The safe move would be to offer to carry a diplomatic message to other civilizations that might be able to help. What kind of assistance are you hoping for? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We had hoped that a civilized species might be willing to negotiate with the Korthak on our behalf, Zikth replied, or perhaps provide humanitarian aid to help evacuate our most vulnerable populations. We know it is much to ask of strangers, but we have nowhere else to turn. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were military personnel who had volunteered for deep space exploration, knowing they might face unknown dangers. They were also human beings who had just heard about 12 billion people facing extinction. Sandra Fox was already running combat projections on her tactical display. Pete Baker was reviewing their supply manifests and crew readiness reports. Rick Davis was checking the ship's weapons and defensive systems. Dr. Helen Parker was pulling up everything she could find about treating alien casualties. They weren't thinking like diplomats or researchers. They were thinking like what they really were, the crew of a warship that had just received a call for help. Zikth, we're going to need more information about the Korthak forces and your planetary defenses, Jake said into the communicator. Send us everything you have. We're coming to help. The alien's response came back immediately, and Jake could hear the relief and hope in the translated voice. Captain Morrison, we are transmitting all available data now. But please understand we cannot ask you to risk your lives for strangers. The Korthak are experienced warriors with superior numbers. Jake smiled grimly as he watched his tactical officer's eyes light up while she reviewed the incoming data about enemy ship capabilities. Sandra Fox had the look of a predator that had just spotted wounded prey. Zikth, you called for help and help is what you're going to get, Jake said. But I need you to understand something. You asked for humanitarian aid, but we're not a relief ship. We're a warship crewed by humans from Earth. When we arrive in your system, we're not coming to negotiate or evacuate civilians. We're coming to remove the threat to your people permanently. The silence from the other end of the transmission stretched for nearly a minute before Zikth responded. Captain Morrison, we do not understand. Your species is unknown to us. What do you mean by removing the threat permanently? Jake looked at his crew again and saw the same expression on every face. They understood exactly what he meant, even if the aliens didn't. Humans had spent millions of years learning how to deal with threats that wanted to kill them. They had gotten very good at it. It means, Zikth, that when this is over, the Korthak Empire is going to learn what happens when you threaten people under human protection, Jake said. Lisa, set course for the Kepler system, maximum speed. Sandra, I want a full tactical analysis of those Korthak ships. Pete, prep the crew for combat operations. Rick, I need every weapon system we have running. The UNS Titan's Hammer streaked through space at maximum velocity, while its crew prepared for something no human had ever done before. They were about to fight the first interstellar war in human history, and they were going to do it exactly the way their species had fought every other war, with overwhelming violence and absolutely no mercy for the enemy. Chief Engineer Rick Davis stood in the main engineering bay watching his teams modify the ship's systems for combat operations. The changes they were making would horrify most galactic civilizations. Rick was rerouting power from life support systems to weapons and shields, creating an environment that would kill most alien species within hours. The oxygen levels dropped to 18%, just enough to keep humans conscious but low enough to free up power for the particle beam arrays. The artificial gravity increased to 1.3 Earth standard, creating crushing weight that would flatten most aliens, but only made the human crew feel more alert and ready for action. The temperature dropped to near freezing, turning the ship into an icebox that conserved energy while keeping the crew sharp and focused. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fox ran continuous diagnostics on every weapon system aboard the ship. The Titan's hammer carried enough firepower to glass a small planet, and every gram of that destructive potential was being brought online. Nuclear torpedo launchers loaded with warheads that burned hotter than stars. Particle beam weapons that could slice through asteroid belts. Electromagnetic pulse generators designed to fry every electronic system within 100,000 kilometers. Most galactic civilizations used weapons designed to disable enemy ships and minimize casualties. Human weapons were designed for one simple purpose: to completely destroy anything they were aimed at. There were no stun settings on human military equipment, no non-lethal options, no way to show mercy to an enemy who had chosen to fight them. Dr. Amy Carter analyzed the tactical data that the Vextai had transmitted about the Korthak fleet. What she discovered made her smile in a way that would have terrified any alien who saw it. The Korthak operated under standard galactic warfare conventions that treated combat like a sporting event with rules and honor codes. Their ships were built for limited engagements with specific objectives. They used formation flying that looked impressive but created massive vulnerabilities. Their weapons were designed to force surrender rather than achieve total destruction. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that other species shared their concept of civilized warfare. Amy realized that the Korthak had never encountered a species from a world like Earth. They had no idea what it meant to fight something that had evolved on a planet where every single day was a struggle against extinction. They were about to face predators who had spent millions of years learning how to kill absolutely everything that threatened them. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the ship observing his crew as they prepared for battle. What he saw would have shocked any galactic observer who believed in the civilized nature of interstellar politics. The humans were not preparing for a rescue mission or a peacekeeping operation. They were preparing for a slaughter. The crew exhibited none of the fear or reluctance that most species showed before combat. Instead, Jake observed something that his military training recognized immediately. His people were showing the physiological and psychological signs of predator excitement. Their heart rates increased, their reflexes sharpened. Their focus narrowed to the simple task of identifying and eliminating threats. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Helen Parker moved through the ship treating crew members for pre-combat stress. But what she found surprised her. Instead of the anxiety and fear she expected, the human crew was displaying what could only be described as eager anticipation. The same biological systems that had allowed their ancestors to hunt saber-toothed cats and survive ice ages were now preparing them for space combat. The ship's Marines trained in the sea cargo bays under the supervision of Lieutenant Commander Tony Adams. The weapons and equipment they carried would be considered war crimes by galactic standards, but were perfectly normal for a species that had evolved fighting everything from giant predators to each other. Plasma rifles that could melt through starship hulls, powered armor that turned each Marine into a walking tank, explosive devices that could level city blocks. Tony watched his Marines practice boarding operations and felt proud of what he saw. These were not peacekeepers or police officers. These were professional killers trained to board enemy ships and eliminate every living thing they found there. The Marines approached their work with the same calm efficiency that their ancestors had shown when hunting mammoths or raiding enemy tribes. Rick Davis finished his modifications to the ship's power systems and ran a final diagnostic. The Titan's hammer was now operating in what human engineers called wartime configuration. Every non-essential system had been shut down or reduced to minimum power. Every erg of energy was being directed toward weapons, shields, and propulsion systems. The ship could now operate for weeks in the vacuum of space with minimal life support. The crew could survive in conditions that would kill any other known species. The weapons could fire continuously for hours without overheating. The shields could absorb punishment that would destroy most alien vessels. Sandra Fox completed her analysis of the Korthak fleet composition and tactical formations. She shared her findings with the senior staff during their final briefing before entering the Kepler system. The enemy had 47 ships arranged in a standard siege formation around the Vextai homeworld. Their vessels were larger than the Titan's hammer and carried more advanced technology. But they were not built for the kind of warfare that humans practiced. The Korthak ships were designed for show-of-force operations and limited tactical engagements. They had weak points that no species would ever think to exploit because attacking them would be considered dishonorable. Their formations looked impressive, but created overlapping fields of fire that could be turned against them. Their communication systems operated on frequencies that could be jammed or intercepted. Commander Pete Baker reviewed the crew readiness reports and declared the ship ready for combat operations. Every human aboard the Titan's hammer was at peak physical condition and mentally prepared for what was coming. They had trained for this moment during countless simulations, but now they would discover if humans could actually fight and win in space. Dr. Amy Carter made one final discovery that changed everything about their approach to the upcoming battle. The Korthak Empire had never lost a major engagement in over 200 years of expansion. They had conquered dozens of species and enslaved billions of beings across their sector of the galaxy. Their success was based on one simple fact. Every species they had ever fought shared the same basic assumptions about how civilized beings conducted warfare. The Korthak expected limited engagements with specific objectives. They expected their enemies to follow rules of engagement that minimized casualties and respected the lives of prisoners. They expected negotiation and surrender when the odds became too unfavorable. They had never encountered a species that approached warfare as a simple matter of killing every enemy until none remained alive to continue fighting. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge as they approached the edge of the Kepler system. In 6 hours, they would drop out of faster-than-light travel and begin the first battle between humans and an alien civilization. The outcome of this engagement would determine humanity's place in galactic politics for centuries to come. The crew was ready. The ship was ready. The weapons were charged and the Marines were armed. Most importantly, the enemy had no idea what was coming for them. The Korthak Empire was about to learn what happened when a species from a death world decided that something needed to die. Jake looked at the tactical display, showing the enemy fleet in their confident siege formation. 47 ships against 1. Under normal galactic warfare conventions, it would be a massacre. Under human warfare conventions, it would still be a massacre. But the victims would be very different than the Korthak expected. The Titan's hammer began its final approach to combat, carrying death toward those who thought they were the masters of this part of the galaxy. Soon they would learn that evolution had produced something new in the universe, something that killed not for territory or resources or glory, but simply because killing threats was what kept their species alive. The Deathworlders were coming, and they had not come to negotiate. The UNS Titan's hammer dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system, like a bullet fired from the darkness of space. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge watching the tactical display as it populated with contact, markers showing the positions of 47 Korthak warships arranged around the blue-green world of Vextai Prime. Admiral Krekstar commanded the Korthak siege fleet from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed any ship in the human fleet. He had been monitoring long-range sensors when the unknown vessel appeared at the system's edge and immediately opened communications to demand identification. The response he received was not what he expected from what appeared to be a single rescue ship. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Nations ship Titan's Hammer." The human's voice came through the universal translator with a tone that suggested complete confidence despite being outnumbered 47-1. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw your forces from this system or we will remove them for you." Admiral Krekstar's reptilian features twisted into what passed for amusement among his species. In 200 years of conquest, no enemy had ever demanded that the Korthak Empire withdraw from anything. The idea that a single ship would challenge his entire fleet was so ridiculous that he almost ignored the transmission entirely. "Unknown vessel, you are interfering with a legitimate military operation of the Korthak Empire," he replied, using the formal diplomatic language that usually preceded surrender negotiations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed along with the insect vermin you seek to protect. The response from the human ship came back immediately and contained words that no galactic civilization had ever spoken to the Korthak fleet. Admiral, we didn't come here to talk. We came here to kill every one of you that doesn't leave right now. This is your only warning. On the bridge of the Titan's hammer, Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fox watched her tactical display with the focused attention of a predator selecting targets. The Korthak fleet was arranged in a perfect siege formation that looked impressive but created exactly the kind of vulnerabilities that human military doctrine was designed to exploit. Captain, the enemy fleet is maintaining standard galactic formation patterns, she reported with barely contained excitement. They're positioned to prevent ships from escaping the planet, but they're not set up to defend against an attacking force. Their overlapping fields of fire create dead zones we can exploit. Captain Morrison nodded as he studied the tactical situation. The Korthak had positioned their ships assuming that any interference would come from other civilized species, following standard engagement protocols. They had no defensive formations because they had never needed them. Every species they had ever fought approached warfare as a limited political exercise rather than a fight to the death. All weapon systems online, Sandra reported as the ship's massive arsenal came to full readiness. Nuclear torpedoes loaded and ready, particle beam arrays charged to maximum power, electromagnetic pulse generators standing by. Chief Engineer Rick Davis monitored the ship's power distribution from his station in engineering. Every system was running at peak efficiency, with massive amounts of energy flowing to weapons that were designed to destroy, rather than disable. The ship's reactor output was enough to power a small city, and every bit of that energy was being directed toward killing the enemy. Admiral Krekstar watched the human ship approach his fleet, and felt the first stirring of concern. The vessel was not slowing down, or requesting safe passage. It was not broadcasting surrender demands, or attempting to negotiate. Instead, it was accelerating directly toward his flagship as if planning to ram it. All ships defensive formation, he ordered, though his tactical officers seemed confused by the command. The Korthak fleet had not needed defensive formations in living memory. Their standard operating procedure was to arrange themselves for maximum intimidation factor while demanding surrender from outgunned opponents. The human ship opened fire at maximum range with weapons that violated every galactic convention about civilized warfare. The first nuclear torpedo struck a Korthak cruiser and vaporized it completely, turning 1,500 beings into expanding plasma in the space of a heartbeat. The second torpedo destroyed a destroyer before its crew even realized they were under attack. Admiral Krekstar stared at his tactical display in horror as two of his ships simply ceased to exist. The weapons that had destroyed them were not designed to disable or capture. They were weapons of absolute destruction that left nothing behind but superheated gas and radiation. Return fire, he ordered, but his gunners were trained for the limited exchanges that characterized galactic warfare. They aimed for the human, ship's engines and weapon systems, trying to disable rather than destroy. Their particle beams and plasma bolts struck the Titan's hammer's shields and were absorbed by defensive systems that had been built to withstand the full fury of solar flares. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fox coordinated the ship's attack with deadly precision that came from millions of years of human evolution. Her ancestors had hunted in packs, coordinated group attacks against prey much larger than themselves, and developed tactics that maximized damage while minimizing risk to the hunting party. The Titan's hammer wove through the Korthak formation like a shark moving through a school of fish. Its weapons fired continuously, each shot designed to completely eliminate an enemy vessel rather than force its surrender. Within 30 minutes of combat, 12 Korthak ships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and radiation. Commander Pete Baker coordinated damage control as enemy fire found its mark. But the human ship had been built by a species that understood the concept of redundant systems. When one shield generator overloaded, 3 others took up the slack. When a weapon turret was damaged, backup systems automatically came online. The ship fought like a wounded animal, becoming more dangerous as it took damage. Admiral Krekstar attempted to rally his fleet, but his crews were not psychologically prepared for the kind of warfare they were experiencing. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that his people had never encountered. Every attack was designed to kill rather than wound. Every tactic was meant to destroy rather than capture. All ships, fall. Back to defensive perimeter, he ordered, hoping to regroup his forces and establish a more defensible position. But the human ship followed his retreating vessels like a hunting pack, pursuing wounded prey, continuing to fire with weapons that turned his proud warships into funeral pyres. Marine Commander Tony Adams monitored the boarding parties that were preparing to assault the Korthak flagship. His Marines were equipped with powered armor and weapons that would allow them to fight in any environment, from the vacuum of space to the poisonous atmosphere of a gas giant. They approached combat with the same calm efficiency that their ancestors had shown when storming enemy fortifications. The turning point came when the Titan's hammer broke through the Korthak defensive line and began targeting their command ships. Admiral Krextar watched in horror as his communications vessel exploded under concentrated fire from the human particle beams. The ship's destruction cut his fleet's coordination abilities and left individual captains to fight their own battles without central command. Dr. Amy Carter analyzed the enemy's response patterns and realized that the Korthak were fighting according to a tactical manual that assumed their opponents would follow the same rules they did. Their entire military doctrine was based on limited engagements, honor-based combat, and the assumption that defeated enemies would be allowed to surrender with dignity. The humans were following none of those rules. They fought like what they were, the products of a world where survival required the complete elimination of threats. They showed no mercy because their evolutionary history had taught them that mercy toward enemies was a luxury that extinct species could not afford. Captain Morrison watched the tactical display as more Korthak ships fled the battle or were destroyed by his weapons. The enemy fleet was beginning to break apart as individual captains realized that they were not fighting a civilized opponent, but something that approached warfare as a matter of species survival. "Captain, the enemy flagship is attempting to signal surrender," Commander Lisa Hayes reported from her communications station. Jake looked at the display showing Admiral Krextar's massive dreadnought, still armed and dangerous despite the losses his fleet had suffered. In galactic warfare, a surrender signal would end the engagement and begin negotiations for terms. In human warfare, a surrender signal was just another tactical consideration. "Tell him we'll accept his surrender after his ship is destroyed and his crew is dead," Jake replied with the calm tone of someone discussing the weather. "We didn't come here to take prisoners. We came here to solve a problem permanently." The Korthak fleet began to disintegrate as captains chose individual survival over collective resistance. Some ships attempted to flee the system, while others tried to hide behind the planet or nearby moons. The Titan's hammer pursued each group with relentless efficiency, destroying vessels that ran and eliminating those that tried to hide. Admiral Krextar found himself commanding a fleet that no longer existed as an organized fighting force. Admiral Krextar stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship watching the human vessel approach through the debris field that had once been his mighty fleet. 46 ships destroyed in less than 4 hours by a single enemy that fought like nothing he had ever encountered in 2 centuries of conquest across the galaxy. The Korthak admiral's reptilian hands shook as he stared at the tactical display, showing the expanding clouds of superheated gas that marked the graves of thousands of his warriors. The humans had not disabled his ships or forced their surrender. They had simply erased them from existence with weapons that burned hotter than stars. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Titan's hammer, studying the massive enemy dreadnought that hung motionless in space before them. The ship was 3 times larger than his vessel and carried enough firepower to level continents, but its crew had lost the will to fight after watching their entire fleet die around them. "Captain, the enemy flagship is broadcasting on all frequencies," Commander Lisa Hayes reported from her communication station. "They're requesting terms for surrender and offering to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this conflict." Jake looked at Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fox, who was monitoring the Korthak ship's weapon systems and defensive capabilities. The enemy vessel was still fully armed and could potentially inflict serious damage on the Titan's hammer if its crew decided to fight to the death instead of accepting defeat. "What's their combat readiness?" Jake asked. though he suspected the answer based on what he had observed during the battle. The Korthak fought according to rules that assumed their enemies shared similar concepts of limited warfare and honorable conduct. "All weapon systems are online, but they're not targeting us," Sandra replied with the clinical precision of someone analyzing prey. "Their shields are at minimum power and their fighters remain in their launch bays. They're acting like the battle is over just because they signaled surrender." Marine Commander Tony Adams stood ready with his boarding parties, waiting for the order to assault the enemy flagship. His Marines were equipped with weapons and armor that would allow them to fight through any environment the aliens could create. They had trained for this moment during countless simulations, but now they would discover what it meant to board an alien warship filled with desperate enemies. Dr. Amy Carter analyzed the tactical data from the battle and made a discovery that explained everything about the Korthak Empire's previous success. Every species they had conquered shared the same basic assumptions about how civilized beings conducted warfare. Limited objectives, rules of engagement, respect for surrender signals, and the belief that defeated enemies should be allowed to survive with dignity. The humans operated under completely different principles that had been burned into their genetic memory by millions of years of survival on a world that tried to kill them every day. They fought until threats were completely eliminated because their evolutionary history taught them that wounded predators were still dangerous predators. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Helen Parker prepared her medical bay to receive prisoners, but she was not treating them for combat injuries. The surviving Korthak crew members were suffering from psychological trauma that bordered on complete mental breakdown. Their minds could not process what they had experienced during the battle. The aliens had evolved on garden worlds with minimal environmental challenges and no serious predator species. Their psychology was designed for limited conflict with clear rules and predictable outcomes. The concept of total warfare practiced by humans was as alien to them as breathing underwater would be to a land-dwelling mammal. Captain Morrison opened a communication channel to the Korthak flagship and addressed Admiral Krextar directly. The conversation that followed would be recorded and transmitted throughout the galaxy, establishing humanity's reputation among the stars for the next 1,000 years. "Admiral Krextar, this is Captain Morrison. You're going to answer some questions for us, and then you're going to deliver a message to your government about what happens when someone threatens people under human protection." The Korthak Admiral's voice came through the translator, sounding hollow and defeated. "Captain Morrison, I surrender my ship and crew to your custody. We request treatment according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war, and ask that you respect the lives of my remaining personnel." Jake exchanged glances with his senior staff before responding. The aliens still believed they were dealing with a civilized species that followed standard galactic protocols for handling defeated enemies. They had no idea that humans approached warfare from the perspective of apex predators who eliminated threats permanently. "Admiral, you're not prisoners of war. You're the surviving members of a military force that threatened to commit genocide against 12 billion civilians. The only reason you're still alive is because we want information about other threats in this sector of space." Tony Adams led his Marines aboard the Korthak flagship through airlocks that had been opened by the surrendering crew. What they found inside the alien vessel confirmed everything the humans had suspected about galactic military technology and tactics. The ship was built for intimidation rather than combat effectiveness. Massive corridors designed to impress visitors rather than facilitate movement during battle. Weapon systems that prioritized visual impact over destructive capability. Defensive systems that assumed enemies would follow rules about targeting non-military areas of the ship. The Korthak crew they encountered were in various states of psychological collapse. Some sat motionless, staring at nothing, while others babbled incoherently about weapons that burned like miniature suns and enemies who fought without honor or mercy. The Marines secured the ship without firing a shot, because the alien crew had lost the ability to resist. Dr. Amy Carter began interrogating the captured alien officers and discovered intelligence that changed humanity's understanding of galactic politics. The Korthak Empire was only one of several aggressive civilizations that had been steadily conquering peaceful species across this sector of space. The galaxy was filled with garden world civilizations that had never developed effective military capabilities because they had never faced serious threats to their survival. Aggressive species like the Korthak had been able to expand almost unopposed because their victims shared the same basic assumptions about limited warfare and civilized conduct. Admiral Krextar provided detailed information about other expansionist powers in the region, not because he wanted to help the humans, but because his mind had been broken by defeat. He spoke about the hegemony that enslaved entire species for labor, the consortium that strip-mined worlds for resources, and the collective that absorbed other civilizations into their hive mind. Captain Morrison realized that the battle they had just fought was not an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of aggression that had been hidden from Earth by distance and poor galactic communications. The peaceful species of the galaxy had been losing a slow war of extinction, while the predator civilizations grew stronger with each conquest. Commander Pete Baker coordinated with the Vextai government to establish humanitarian aid operations. For the civilians who had been terrorized by the Korthak siege, the insectoid aliens were grateful beyond measure for their rescue. But they were also terrified by the humans who had saved them. The Vextai had monitored the entire battle and recorded the systematic destruction of 46 warships by a single human vessel. They understood that they owed their lives to beings who approached warfare with a level of violence that exceeded anything in their experience or imagination. Diplomat Zeketh transmitted a formal message to the Galactic Council describing the hour, human intervention, and recommending immediate recognition of Earth as a major power. The message included tactical recordings of the battle that would be studied by military analysts throughout known space. Dr. Helen Parker completed her psychological evaluation of the Korthak prisoners and made a recommendation that would influence human policy toward aggressive alien civilizations for generations to come. The surviving enemies were not capable of rehabilitation or integration into peaceful society. They were predators who understood only strength and would interpret mercy as weakness. Chief Engineer Rick Davis began salvaging technology from the destroyed Korthak ships, but what he found disappointed him. The alien weapons and defensive systems were inferior to human equivalents in every meaningful way. The galaxy's most feared military force had been equipped with technology that looked impressive, but lacked the brutal efficiency of human engineering. Captain Morrison made the decision that would define humanity's role in galactic politics. The Korthak prisoners would be returned to their government, along with a simple message. The Korthak Empire would withdraw from all conquered territories and cease all military operations against peaceful civilizations, or Earth would send more ships with the same mission the Titan's hammer had just completed. The surviving Korthak crew was loaded aboard a captured transport vessel, along with complete tactical recordings of their fleet's destruction. Admiral Krextar would carry the message to his government that a new power had emerged in the galaxy, one that fought wars the way apex predators eliminated threats to their pack. As the TR, 6 months after the Battle of Vextai Prime, the galaxy had become a very different place than it was before humans answered a simple distress call with overwhelming violence. Captain Jake Morrison, now Admiral Morrison, stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, watching Earth's newest warships patrol the outer rim territories where aggressive civilizations had once hunted peaceful species without fear of consequence. The shipyards orbiting Earth worked around the clock building vessels that carried names reflecting humanity's approach to interstellar politics. The UNS Inevitable cruised the trade routes, ensuring that merchant ships could travel without fear of piracy. The UNS Final Answer stationed itself in systems where aggressive species were considering expansion. The UNS Problem Solver responded to distress calls with the same efficiency that had made the Titan's hammer famous throughout known space. Every human warship carried the same message to the galaxy. Peaceful civilizations could develop and trade without interference, but any species that chose aggression would face beings who had spent millions of years perfecting the art of killing threats before those threats could kill them. Commander Pete Baker commanded the UNS Retribution and led humanity's first official peacekeeping mission to end a territorial dispute between two civilizations that had been fighting for over 3 centuries. The conflict ended within hours of his arrival in the system, when both sides realized that continuing their war might attract the kind of attention that the Korthak Empire had received. The mere presence of a human warship had become synonymous with the permanent end of aggressive behavior. No civilization wanted to test whether their particular conflict was worth facing beings who approached warfare as a matter of species survival rather than political posturing. Dr. Amy Carter, now Director of Xenological Studies for the United Nations Space Command, led research teams throughout human-controlled space, studying other potential Deathworld species. Her work revealed that Earth was unusually hostile even by Deathworld standards, having produced a species with unique combinations of intelligence, adaptability, and aggressive capability that no other known civilization possessed. The galaxy contained dozens of garden worlds where intelligent species had evolved without facing serious environmental challenges or predator pressure. These civilizations developed advanced technology and complex social structures, but they lacked the psychological framework necessary for effective warfare against determined enemies. Chief Engineer Rick Davis supervised the construction of humanity's first permanent base outside the Sol system on Vexti Prime, where human technicians worked alongside their insectoid allies to develop hybrid technologies that combined the best aspects of both civilizations. The Vexti provided advanced medical equipment and scientific instruments, while humans contributed weapons technology and defensive systems that could protect peaceful species from aggressive neighbors. The partnership between humans and Vexti became the model for Earth's expansion into galactic politics. Humanity offered military protection in exchange for technological cooperation and intelligence about potential threats. The arrangement satisfied everyone involved because it gave peaceful species security while providing humans with the resources and information they needed to identify and eliminate dangers before they became serious problems. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Fox established the Galactic Threat Assessment Division and began cataloging every aggressive civilization within 500 light-years of Earth. Her teams analyzed military capabilities, territorial ambitions, and historical patterns of expansion to create target lists for potential human intervention. The data revealed a galaxy where predator civilizations had been gradually consuming peaceful species for thousands of years while hiding their activities behind complex political arrangements and diplomatic protocols. The slow war of conquest had been invisible to most galactic observers because it followed rules that made aggression appear civilized and reasonable. Marine Commander Tony Adams trained the first generation of human soldiers specifically for interstellar warfare at facilities built throughout human-controlled space. His Marines learned to fight in every possible environment, from the vacuum of space to the crushing gravity of supermassive worlds, preparing for conflicts against enemies whose capabilities and psychology remained largely unknown. The training emphasized the fundamental principles that had allowed humans to survive on Earth and win their first interstellar war. Overwhelming violence applied with precision and speed. No mercy for enemies who chose aggression over cooperation. Complete elimination of threats, rather than negotiated settlements that left problems unsolved. Former Admiral Krextar lived in a rehabilitation facility on Earth, where human psychologists studied the long-term effects of military defeat on aggressive alien species. His reports provided valuable intelligence about Korthak military doctrine and territorial organization, but more importantly, they revealed the psychological weaknesses that humans could exploit when fighting other predator civilizations. The broken Korthak officer served as a living example of what happened when species that had never faced serious resistance encountered beings who fought wars the way apex predators eliminated threats to their territory. His condition influenced human strategic planning and helped military commanders understand how to break enemy morale through demonstrations of superior violence. Dr. Helen Parker established medical facilities throughout human space that could treat both human personnel and alien civilians caught in war zones. Her teams developed procedures for handling the psychological trauma that peaceful species experienced when witnessing human military operations, creating support systems that helped garden world civilizations cope with the reality of total warfare. The medical data revealed fundamental differences between species that had evolved on dangerous worlds and those that developed on peaceful planets. Humans possessed biological and psychological adaptations that allowed them to function normally in high-stress combat situations that would incapacitate most other intelligent species. Commander Lisa Hayes coordinated communications between Earth and the various alien governments that sought alliance with humanity. The diplomatic traffic revealed a galaxy in transition as peaceful civilizations aligned themselves with the new power while aggressive species retreated from territorial ambitions that suddenly seemed too dangerous to pursue. The Galactic Council established new protocols specifically addressing humanity's participation in interstellar affairs. The Deathworld Doctrine became official policy, acknowledging that species evolved on high-threat worlds operated under different survival paradigms and could not be held to the same standards of conduct that applied to Garden World civilizations. Captain Morrison addressed the Galactic Council for the first time as Earth's official representative, delivering a speech that established humanity's position in galactic politics for centuries to come. His words were transmitted throughout known space and studied by political analysts on thousands of worlds. "We didn't ask to join your galaxy," he told the assembled representatives of dozens of civilizations. "We answered a distress call from people who needed help, and we provided that help using the methods our world taught us. We're not conquerors seeking to dominate other species, but we won't allow peaceful civilizations to be destroyed by predators who mistake mercy for weakness." The speech continued with terms that shocked diplomatic observers throughout the galaxy. Humanity would guarantee the security of any peaceful civilization that requested protection, but aggressive species would face the same fate that befell the Korthak Empire. There would be no negotiations with genocidal governments, no diplomatic immunity for those who chose warfare against civilians, and no mercy for enemies who threatened extinction-level events against peaceful worlds. Admiral Morrison concluded his address with words that became the unofficial motto of human space forces. "Our world spent millions of years teaching us that the most dangerous predators are the ones smart enough to build tools, stubborn enough to never surrender, and crazy enough to fight anything that threatens what they choose to protect. We choose to protect this galaxy from those who would destroy it." The response from the galactic community was immediate and dramatic. Peaceful species requested formal alliance with Earth, while aggressive civilizations began withdrawing from expansion plans that no longer seemed worth the risk. The mere possibility of human intervention had eliminated most interstellar conflicts before they could begin. New human vessels departed Earth every week, carrying crews trained for one specific mission. They would patrol the space lanes, ensuring that merchant ships could trade freely, respond to distress calls with overwhelming force, and demonstrate to potential aggressors that peaceful civilizations now had protectors who understood that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be so thoroughly prepared for war that no one dared disturb. The galaxy learned that when Deathworlders answered calls for help, they brought solutions that were both permanent and absolute. The age of slow conquest by predator civilizations had ended not through diplomatic negotiation or political arrangement, but through the simple demonstration that evolution had produced something new among the stars.